Okay, welcome back. This is week 3 in Chapter 3. The title of this chapter is Configuring Color and Text with CSS, Cascading Style Sheets. There's some learning objectives on page 81, so let's go through those really quickly. So, describe the evolution of style sheets. List the advantages. Use color. Create style sheets. Apply inline and embedded and external, and configure some cool elements to use those things. Then utilize the cascade in cascading style sheets, and then do some validation. So those are all legit, and we're all going to do them all. So let's just start at the very beginning and talk about what it is we're talking about. So the way I like to describe the fundamental purpose of a cascading style sheet is to separate the content of the page from the presentation, from the way it looks. And the best way to actually describe that, because that's a little tough to describe, is to look at an example. So there's a website out here called the CSS Zen Garden. And so I just want to browse through some of these designs here. And so here's some really cool web page designs. Ooh, that one looks pretty wild. So there's a cool website there, and here's another cool website here. And I mean, it's got some really nice stuff. Have you noticed anything unusual? Probably not, because you're not zoomed in. But I will tell you that every single one of these websites we just looked at have the exact same content. Every word is the same. The only thing that's different is the presentation. Now, that's what we're talking about. I'm separating the content of the web page, you know, the pictures and the words, from how it's presented. So I have lots and lots of ways of presenting the same information. Every single one of these are using the exact same content. Not a word different between them all. Okay? It's just presentation. Got it? Okay. So, one more time. The fundamental purpose for doing CSS is to separate content from presentation. So, why do we want to do that? I mean, okay, you told me that the purpose is to separate, content from presentation, but what does that actually mean? Well, what that really means is that my website, which has a bunch of words, a bunch of content, I really don't want to have my decoration inside my file. Wouldn't it be kind of cool if I could figure out some way to yank the presentation part out? And like this, I just swap it out. Oh, well, you want this, you just swap these things out. The content stays the same, and you just swap out the presentation. I mean, in theory, you could have a web page that every time you went to it, it looked completely different. I mean, don't do that, because that would be dumb. But you could. All right. So why is it important to do that? Well, that one's a little bit more difficult to answer at this point, but we're going to get to that. So, on page 82, they talk about CSS in general. So CSS, in their terms, using the book's language, is a flexible, cross-platform, standards-based language. Okay, that's fine. But you could have probably said that about 5 or 6 things. What's significant about this? So, on page 82, they talk about the advantages of CSS. Now, that's where we're kind of getting there. One is it provides better page layout than just using HTML by itself. So HTML is very, very impressive, but there's only, a couple dozen tags that exist and, a couple dozen more attributes. And so if you want to do this kind of stuff, like we're looking at the screen now, you need something more than just HTML. The style is separate from the actual structure of the data. We're going to do some demos on that. Not necessarily this chapter, but the next chapter we're actually going to be, breaking up in our web page into zones. Styles can be stored and reused. Ooh, I like that. So what happens on my case, if I go to one of my websites and I go in here and I go, so this is a particular style that I've come up with. I'm not necessarily saying it's a good style, but hey. So when I go to each one of these pages, all I did was just copy and paste some information, right? So did this page have the exact same style as this page? Yeah, it did. So instead of copying and pasting the style over and over and over and over and over, I actually pulled the style out into a separate file, and then I just connect to it. So every single one of these pages is using a common style sheet, an external file, a style sheet. Kind of cool. So it makes the document smaller. If I had to copy all this formatting, all this presentation into every single one of those web pages, well, then each web page would be kind of large. And then, of course, it makes it a lot easier for site maintenance. So that's kind of the advantages, but let's kind of drill down into it a little better. How is this better? Because I put the style sheet here, because I put these guys in separate style sheets and use them over again, the concept is edit one and done. Let's say, for example, that I didn't want this graphic over there in the corner. Well, I could, if I had copied and pasted, I would have gone through every single page in the entire document and find that graphic and replace it. On the other hand, if that graphic was part of a single style sheet that was applied to every single one of these pages, edit one and done. I go to that style sheet, I swap out the graphic, I'm done. I don't have anything else to do. Isn't that pretty cool? All right. So the different types of CSS, and we're going to go through this in a little bit. We're going to demo it all. But on page 83, they talk about 4. We're only going to use 3 of those, but 4 different types of CSS. The first one is called inline. And I guess I could demo that rather than just kind of talk it. That's kind of dumb. So let me go ahead. Hey, I'm going to go through this a little slower this time. So if you're using Visual Studio, which, again, you're not obligated to do so, I'm going to go through it just a tiny bit slower than I did last time to show you exactly how I set up my my projects. Because in the end, when it comes time for you to submit an assignment, you're going to have to know where these things are. So give this just a second to come up. Okay. So I'm going to do File, New, and I'm going to tell it Project. That part's pretty straightforward. There is a thing called Website, but I don't recommend you do that. So I'm just going to go to Project. Now this part's a little weird because there is no high-level category in Visual Studio for producing web pages, because that's primarily. So I'm using under a thing called Visual C#. We are not using Visual C# anywhere in this course whatsoever. I'm just telling you that's where you go to get to the part where it says web. All right. So this is the location where I'm going to find these things. So when it comes time for you to submit an assignment, you're going to have to remember, oh, well, it's under Documents and Visual Studio and Projects and then something. So let's say this is, I don't know, I'm going to do it by chapter, but, pretend like this was an assignment. This would be like assignment 2, 3, 4, whatever. So I'm going to say Chapter 3. That makes for a good title. Okay. Right here is a button that says, you want to add application insights? Well, no, I don't. So I'm going to uncheck that. Okay. I'm going to hit OK. And then it's going to ask me what kind of template. And there's a gazillion different templates. But I'm just going to pick the very simple one. And then one of the check marks here is, hey, would you like to host this in the cloud? No, I'm just goofing off right now. I'm not actually doing a real web page. So I'm going to unclick that. And then hit OK. Okay. Whew. And that'll be a little less stuff involved, and so it just makes it a little bit easier because fewer moving parts is just somehow better. All right, so now we're back up and running. I'm going to do a right click on this thing that's already highlighted over here in the Solution Explorer. Now notice that there's a thing called Solution. This thing's called a project. Again, I'm not trying to get you into the weeds, but I need to click on the thing that's shaded and then say I want to add. And you could just pick this thing right off the list because Style Sheet and HTML page are the 2 things that we're going to be using. We're not going to be using any of these other things, just Well, okay, we might actually have a JavaScript file. But anyway, these things is what we want. So I'm going to pick HTML page. And you have to give it a name. And the name of the very, very first page in your website probably ought to be something called index. And I'll get to a reason why that is a little later. Okay. Now, I know I went through that a little fast last time, so now we're cool. All right, so back to the actual topic at hand. So, I have a paragraph here, and I don't know, I've just got Mary had a little lamb. So, one of the things you can do is you can add an attribute. Remember attributes? Attributes are those things that happen inside an opening tag. I can have an attribute called style. Remember, all attributes have an equal sign and something inside double quotes? Cool. And then I could type some stuff. And the stuff here can change like the color of the text. And I'm going to say color, red. Okay? Now, trust me, we're going to get into that. What I'm trying to show you is this is what's called embedded. So I'm going to do a right click and view this thing in the browser. And if everything works the way it's supposed to, then yay, this is in red. Okay, so that's an inline style. Inline style basically uses the style attribute, and it appears inside a tag. That's why it's called an inline style. In other words, the style is not separated from the content of the web page. It's actually embedded into the content of the web page. Okay. So that's not exactly remember the whole guiding principle behind using CSS was to separate content from presentation. Well, this isn't the way that's done. This actually really is embedded inside the HTML. Okay. So that's one technique. And there'll be some scenarios where we would do this. Not many, but it's possible you could do this. The other one is called an embedded. Sometimes people call this the internal, but I'm going to use embedded. An embedded one, same concept, except you put the instructions up here in the head. Okay, now I'm going to take this part out. So this says, now there's no color, right? I'm going to go here, and I'm going to create using a style tag. Now, one was a style attribute that appeared inside a tag. And now I'm actually using another thing called a style tag. Admittedly, this is, I think, the only scenario that I know of where the name of a tag is also the name of an attribute. Okay, admittedly, that doesn't make it very clear, but hey, I didn't write this stuff. Okay, and I'm gonna type some magic, and don't worry about what the magic means. But I'm gonna type the letter P, curly brace, and I'm gonna say,
unable to process your request. Try again later.
Shut up. Dang. Okay. So again, I've typed some magic here. That is annoying. Okay. So I've typed some stuff. Don't worry about what the stuff means, but I'm just going to run this. And and it came out just as red as it did before. Woohoo! So that's what's called an embedded. In other words, I've got the style, but it's embedded inside the head. Now, what's the defining factor about things that appear in the head, between the opening head and the closing head? What's that all about? Well, if you remember, things that appear inside the head are not rendered inside the page. So this style now is not something that shows up. It's consumed by the web page, but it's not displayed in the web page. I know that's probably a bad explanation, but things that appear in the head are things that are instructions, suggestions, all sorts of other things, but they're not actual part of the content. So now I actually have separated content from presentation. It's still inside the same file, but it ain't bad. Okay, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark, so we'll pause this and continue in just a few.